Picture a small town nestled between whispering pines and a lazy river, where everyone knows your name and your story. Riverest was that kind of place, but on a chilly autumn day, it held its breath in grief. A little girl named Sophie Taylor, just 6 years old, was about to be laid to rest. Her funeral was a wound in the community's heart, yet something extraordinary was about to unfold, something led by a dog named Dakota, whose loyalty would unravel a mystery no one saw coming. This is a story of love, intuition, and the kind of bond that defies even death. So, settle in, because you're about to hear a tale that'll make you hug your pets a little tighter tonight. The air in Riverest's cemetery hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading roses. Mourners huddled under gray skies, their whispers mingling with the rustle of leaves skittering across graves. Sophie Taylor's tiny coffin, draped in white lilies, sat at the center of it all, a painful reminder of a life cut short. The preacher's voice trembled as he spoke of her bright spirit, but the crowd's sobs drowned him out. Then, a sharp bark sliced through the sorrow. Dakota, Sophie's black Antan German shepherd, strained against his leash, eyes locked on the coffin. It wasn't just grief, it was something urgent, like he sensed a secret no one else could. Dakota's handler, Officer Ruiz, tried to calm him, but the dog's paws dug into the grass, his whines rising into a desperate howl. People exchanged uneasy glances, some thought it was just a dog's heartache, others whispered about the uncanny. The shepherd's nose twitched, catching a faint trace of something alive beneath the lily's cloying sweetness. He lunged, leaping onto the coffin with such force that the flowers scattered. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just mourning. What was Dakota trying to say? And why now, at the edge of goodbye? The preacher paused, his Bible trembling in his hands, as Dakota pawed at the coffin's polished wood. Officer Ruiz, face flushed with embarrassment, yanked the leash, but Dakota wouldn't budge. His eyes, wide and pleading, seemed to beg the crowd to listen. Sophie's uncle Jake, a grizzled ex-medic with a limp from his army days, stepped forward, his gut twisting. He'd seen dogs like this in war zones, dogs that knew things humans missed. Could Dakota, a half-trained police dog, really be sensing something beyond grief? The community of Riverest was no stranger to loss, but this moment felt different, charged with a strange hope. Dakota's barks echoed, each one a plea that stirred whispers of doubt. Was Sophie truly gone, or was this dog, her fiercest protector, catching a faint thread of life? Jake knelt beside Dakota, his hand brushing the dog's trembling flank, and felt a chill. The universe seemed to hold its breath, urging someone to act. But act on what? A dog's instinct in the face of death's certainty? Mourners shifted, torn between respect for the ceremony and the pull of Dakota's urgency. A child's funeral was sacred, yet Dakota's behavior was a mystery too loud to ignore. Jake's eyes met Officer Ruiz's, both men silently questioning the impossible. The coffin gleamed under the weak sunlight, and Dakota's whines grew softer, almost mournful, as if he feared being too late. The crowd waited, hearts pounding, for a sign that this wasn't just a dog's delusion but a miracle in the making. Riverest streets still echoed with memories of Sophie Taylor, a girl whose laughter could light up the gloomiest days. Her blonde curls bounced as she'd skip past the bakery, the warm scent of fresh bread clinging to her sweater. At 6, she was a spark of empathy, always stopping to pet stray cats or share her crayons with shy kids at school. But behind her bright smile hid a battle with epilepsy, a shadow cast by a car accident 2 years earlier. The crash stole her mom and left Sophie with seizures that struck like sudden storms. Who could have guessed such a tiny soul carried so much trauma? The accident was a wound Riverest never forgot. Sophie's mom, Lily, had been the town's heart, her voice a melody at church picnics. When their car skidded on black ice, Lily shielded Sophie, but only the girl survived. Sophie's seizures started soon after, each one a reminder of that frozen night. Yet she faced them with resilience, clutching her stuffed giraffe, Mr. Spots, and whispering, "I'm stronger than you think." Her dad, Tom, watched her with weary pride, wondering if courage could outrun fate. But how long could a child fight such a relentless foe? Sophie's spirit drew people in, like moths to a lantern. At school, she'd organize kindness days, handing out daisy chains she'd woven by the river, their petals soft against her fingers. Her teachers marveled at her mind, sharp, curious, and quick to solve puzzles. But the seizures grew fiercer, sometimes stealing her mid-sentence, her body trembling as classmates froze in fear. Still, Sophie would wake with a grin, saying, "I'm okay, just took a little nap." Her resistance was a lesson in itself, but what did it cost her? The town rallied around her, their community a patchwork of love. Neighbors dropped off casseroles, their savory steam filling Tom's kitchen, and kids drew cards with wobbly hearts. Sophie's love for animals shone brightest. She'd spend hours at the shelter, her giggles mingling with the jingle of dog tags. She'd whisper secrets to the scruffiest mutts, as if they understood her better than anyone. It was like the universe knew she'd need a protector, someone to stand by her through the storms. Was that why Dakota came into her life? By her 6th birthday, Sophie's light still burned bright, but her body was tiring. The seizures came more often, each one a thief stealing a little more of her spark. Tom clung to hope, praying for a miracle, while Sophie dreamed of running free with the animals she loved. Her courage was a beacon, but the road ahead felt impossibly steep. As the town watched her fight, they couldn't know a scrappy German shepherd was about to change everything. What kind of bond could turn pain into purpose? The animal shelter in Riverest smelled of hay and wet fur, a place where broken things found second chances. Sophie, barely 5, wandered its concrete halls, her sneakers squeaking on the floor, drawn to a trembling German shepherd pup cowering in a corner. Dakota was all ribs and scars, his amber eyes wide with fear from a past of abuse. When Sophie knelt, offering a gentle hand, he didn't snap or shrink, he leaned into her touch, his tail giving a timid wag. It was a connection that felt like fate, like the universe had tied their hearts with an invisible string. Who else could understand a scared soul better than Sophie? Tom hesitated to adopt Dakota, money was tight, and a dog with baggage seemed like trouble. But Sophie's pleas, her voice soft as the jingle of her charm bracelet, wore him down. The first night, Dakota curled up on Sophie's bed, his warmth a quiet promise of protection. Then, something miraculous happened. One evening, as Sophie's laughter filled the living room, Dakota's ears perked up. He nudged her, whining, just before a seizure hit. No training, no explanation, just pure instinct. Was this scruffy pup really her guardian angel? Their bond grew like wildflowers in spring, messy and beautiful. Sophie would toss a frayed tennis ball across the backyard, her giggles blending with Dakota's playful barks, the grass tickling their feet. She'd whisper secrets to him under the oak tree, her breath warm against his fur, calling him my brave boy. Dakota never left her side, his eyes tracking her every move. When seizures loomed, he'd paw at her or nudge her to sit, a natural seizure alert that saved her time and again. How could a dog with so little trust in the world give so much love to one girl? The town marveled at their partnership. At the park, kids would cheer as Dakota bounded after Sophie, his tail a blurry fan against the sunset's glow. But it wasn't just play, Dakota's vigilance was uncanny. Once, at a school fair, he froze mid-step, pressing against Sophie as she sank to the ground, seizure coming. Parents whispered, "That dog's a miracle." Sophie's community saw her strength reflected in Dakota's loyalty, but no one knew how deep their bond ran. Could a dog's heart really sense what doctors couldn't? By Sophie's 6th birthday, Dakota was her shadow, his fur dusted with flour from her attempts at baking cookies. She'd smear peanut butter on his nose, laughing as he licked it off, the kitchen alive with their joy. But as her seizures worsened, Dakota's alerts grew more urgent, his whine sharper, like he knew time was slipping. Sophie clung to him, her tiny hands buried in his fur, whispering, "You'll always find me, right?" Their connection was a lifeline, but would it be enough to face the darkness creeping closer? Riverest's police station buzzed with the sharp tang of coffee and the hum of radios, a world far from Sophie's cozy backyard. Officer Ruiz, a gruff man with a soft spot for strays, had noticed Dakota's uncanny knack for sensing Sophie's seizures. One spring morning, as pollen dusted the air like gold, he approached Tom with an idea: train Dakota as a part-time police dog. The shepherd's sharp nose and fierce loyalty could serve the community, sniffing out trouble while staying Sophie's service animal. It felt like a spark of hope, a chance to turn their bond into something bigger. But could a scrappy rescue handle such a leap? Tom was skeptical, his hands calloused from long shifts at the mill, but Sophie's eyes lit up like fireflies. "Dakota's a hero," she chirped, her voice bouncing off the station's tiled walls. The training began in a dusty field, where Dakota learned to track scents, gunpowder, sweat, even fear, his paws kicking up clouds of dirt. He'd bound back to Sophie after each drill, tail wagging like a metronome, as if to say, "I've got this." His resilience stunned Ruiz. This was no ordinary dog. What drove Dakota to rise above his haunted past? The training wasn't easy. Dakota balked at loud sirens, his ears flattening at their wail, a reminder of cruelties he'd known. But Sophie was his anchor. She'd sit cross-legged in the grass, her cotton dress dotted with dandelion fluff, cheering him on with claps that echoed like tiny drum beats. When Dakota nailed a search, finding a hidden bag in under a minute, Ruiz hooped, and Sophie tossed her hero a treat. The connection between girl and dog fueled his progress, but could it balance his dual roles? By summer, Dakota was a star. At a town fair, he demonstrated his skills, sniffing out a mock evidence bag while kids cheered, their cotton candy sticky on their fingers. He'd then trot to Sophie, pressing his nose to her palm, checking for signs of a seizure. The service animal role came first, and the police agreed. Dakota could work part-time, staying home with Sophie most days. The extra income eased Tom's worries, buying better meds for Sophie. It was a win for Riverest, but was the strain on Dakota too much? Dakota's new purpose gave Sophie pride, her chest puffing as she bragged, "My dog's a cop." She'd draw him in crayons, a badge on his fur, her giggles filling their porch as crickets sang. But as her seizures grew fiercer, Dakota's police work took a back seat. He'd skip drills to lie by her side, his steady breaths a lifeline. The town saw their bond as a miracle, but storm clouds were gathering. How long could Dakota juggle his duties before something broke? The hospital in Riverest carried the sterile sting of antiseptic, its fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped bees. Sophie lay in a bed too big for her small frame, her blonde curls splayed on the pillow, pale as the sheets. Her seizures had turned relentless, striking multiple times a day, each one draining her spark. Tom sat beside her, the creak of his chair a constant in the quiet room, his hands clutching a worn photo of Sophie and Dakota. The healthcare system offered little hope, meds weren't working, and specialists were hours away. Could anyone find a diagnosis to save her? Dr. Hargrove, the hospital's chief neurologist, was a man of clipped words and cold hands. He reviewed Sophie's charts with a frown, muttering about refractory epilepsy and limited options. His dismissive tone grated on Dr. Lena Patel, a younger neurologist whose warm eyes mirrored Sophie's empathy. Lena noticed Dakota's behavior, how he'd whine and paw at Sophie before seizures, his intuition sharper than any machine. Hargrove scoffed, calling it anecdotal nonsense, but Lena pushed for more tests. Was Dakota sensing something the doctors missed? Sophie's condition worsened as summer faded. Her laughter, once a melody, grew rare, replaced by shallow breaths and flickering eyelids. Dakota, allowed in the hospital thanks to his service animal status, refused to leave her side. His fur caught the faint vanilla scent of Sophie's shampoo as he pressed against her, his low whines echoing in the sterile room. Lena watched, scribbling notes, convinced Dakota's alerts held a clue. But Hargrove insisted Sophie's brain activity was unsustainable. How could a dog's instincts challenge a doctor's verdict? The tension between the doctors boiled over in a late-night meeting, the hospital's coffee machine gurgling in the background. Lena argued for a rare condition, perhaps a misdiagnosed metabolic disorder, pointing to Dakota's consistent alerts. Hargrove, face red, declared Sophie clinically hopeless, pushing for palliative care. Tom, caught in the crossfire, felt his heart splinter. Dakota's protection had saved Sophie before, but now even he seemed frantic, his bark sharper, as if pleading for someone to listen. Was there still time to uncover the truth? One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled outside, Sophie slipped into a coma-like state. Hargrove pronounced her brain dead, his pen scratching the final diagnosis like a death knell. Yet Dakota's behavior grew wilder. He'd nudge Sophie's hand, then pace, his claws clicking on the tile. Lena, defying protocol, ordered an emergency scan, her gut screaming that Dakota knew something. The community prayed, unaware that a dog's fierce love was about to spark a desperate fight against fate. What would it take to prove Dakota right? The cemetery in Riverest was a sea of black umbrellas, the air thick with the musty chill of autumn rain. Sophie's coffin gleamed under a tarp, its white lilies now soggy, their petals curling like tiny fists. The preacher's voice faltered, drowned by the soft patter of rain on leaves, as the community stood frozen in grief. Then came Dakota's bark, sharp, insistent, cutting through the sorrow like a blade. The German shepherd lunged, breaking free from Officer Ruiz's grip, and landed on the coffin, his paws scraping the wood. Was this just a dog's heartbreak, or something far more urgent? Dakota's eyes burned with a fierce intuition, his nose twitching as if catching a scent no one else could name, a faint pulse of life beneath the rain's cold sting. He pawed at the coffin, his whines rising into a howl that sent shivers down spines. Mourners gasped, some clutching their coats, others whispering prayers. Officer Ruiz, face pale, tried to pull Dakota back, but the dog stood firm, his fur bristling under the drizzle. It was as if he was shouting, "She's not gone." Could a dog really sense what humans had missed? Jake, Sophie's uncle, pushed through the crowd, his boots sinking into the muddy grass. A former army medic, he knew dogs like Dakota, ones that sniffed out danger or life in the chaos of war. His heart raced as he knelt beside the shepherd, the damp earth soaking his jeans. Dakota's behavior wasn't grief, it was a signal, like a flare in the dark. Jake's fingers brushed the coffin, his mind flashing to Lena's last-minute scan, ignored by Hargrove. Had the healthcare system failed Sophie in her final moments? The preacher hesitated, his Bible slick with rain, as the crowd's murmurs grew louder. "Let the dog be," Jake growled, his voice rough but steady. He pressed his ear to the coffin, straining for any sound, a breath, a heartbeat, his own pulse thundering in his ears. Dakota's whine softened, his nose nudging Jake's arm, urging him to act. The community held its breath, torn between disbelief and a flicker of hope. Was there a chance, however slim, that Sophie was still with them? Time seemed to freeze, the rain a steady drumbeat against the silence. Jake stood, his eyes locking with Tom's, who looked like a man drowning in both grief and doubt. Dakota circled the coffin, his tail low but alert, as if guarding a secret too big for words. The universe seemed to whisper, "Listen to the dog." The mourners waited, hearts pounding, for a decision that could rewrite this tragedy. Would Jake's trust in Dakota spark a miracle, or was this just a desperate grasp at nothing? The cemetery's silence shattered as Jake's shout rang out, his voice raw against the rain's steady hiss. "Open it! Now!" Dakota stood sentinel by Sophie's coffin, his fur matted, eyes blazing with a fierce intuition that seemed to pierce the veil of death. The crowd parted, their breaths catching, as Tom stumbled forward, his face a mask of anguish and hope. The coffin's lid creaked open, the sound sharp as a snapped branch, revealing Sophie's still form, pale but oddly peaceful. Could Dakota's relentless protection have caught a miracle in the nick of time? Jake's hands trembled as he checked for a pulse, the cold damp of Sophie's wrist sending a jolt through him. Dakota nudged closer, his warm breath puffing against Jake's arm, urging him on. A faint flutter, barely there, but real, pulsed under Jake's fingers. "She's alive," he gasped, the words igniting the community like a spark in dry grass. Mourners wept, some falling to their knees in the mud, as Officer Ruiz radioed for an ambulance, its siren already wailing in the distance. How had Dakota known when even machines had failed? The ambulance roared into the cemetery, its red lights flashing like beacons through the drizzle. Paramedics swarmed, their boots squelching, as they hooked Sophie to monitors, her tiny chest rising faintly. Dr. Lena Patel, who'd rushed from the hospital, knelt beside Dakota, her hands shaking as she whispered, "You were right." The dog's resilience, his refusal to give up, had forced the healthcare system to face its mistake. Hargrove's cold diagnosis had been wrong, Sophie's rare condition had mimicked death. But what would it take to bring her back fully? Tom clung to Sophie's hand in the ambulance, the sterile smell of gauze mixing with his tears. Dakota rode along, his head resting on Sophie's stretcher, his steady presence a testament to their unbreakable love. At the hospital, Lena led a team to stabilize Sophie, adjusting meds for a metabolic disorder missed by scans. Days passed, each one a battle, but Sophie's eyes finally fluttered open, meeting Dakota's watchful gaze. The town rallied, their prayers a chorus of hope, but the road to recovery was steep. Could Sophie's spirit rise once more? As Sophie grew stronger, Riverest buzzed with stories of Dakota's miracle. The shepherd, once a trembling rescue, had become a hero, his barks now a symbol of resilience. Sophie, still frail, would stroke his fur, whispering, "You found me." Their bond had defied death, proving that love could outsmart fate. The community learned a lesson: sometimes, the truest wisdom comes from a heart with 4 paws. What greater gift could a dog give than a second chance at life? And there it is, folks, the story of Sophie and Dakota, a tale that reminds us how deep the bond between a girl and her dog can run. It's like the universe sent Dakota to Riverest to show us what love, intuition, and resilience really mean. From a tragic farewell to a heart-stopping miracle, their journey teaches us that hope can bloom even in the darkest moments. Sometimes, the greatest teachers have 4 paws and a wagging tail. So, tell us in the comments, have you ever had an animal that changed your life? Share your story, we can't wait to hear it.